Phoneybeetlemaniacxs here on the bunch once again. DeityfreeDee's has made responses to me, and she's reading from Dan Barker's book, Losing Faith in Faith, and when he gets to words, she mispronounces. Sorry. She mispronounces a few. She mispronounced annals as anals. Sorry. So, grow up, Gary. Gary, grow up. You can call me Gary. I got mine. I put my first name out there for a reason. I really do. So if people want to respond to me, they can do so on a personal level. But a lot of the things you were saying aren't true. And a lot of the people that you cite are wrong. Let's talk about Dan Barker for a minute and his research methodology, and I use the word methodology like that. He has the same research methodology as Kent Oldland. The fact that he doesn't research, he basically repeats verbatim what somebody, one of these like Jesus nutbags things, and repeats them verbatim. That's the reason he cites people like freaking Gandhi, J. Wells, people like that. People who shouldn't be taken seriously. Now, there are two people on that who should be taken seriously: Bart, Ehrman, and Albert Schweitzer. Both of whom actually believe in a historical Jesus. So I think it's a bit dishonest for Dan Barker to cite them and say that they support a side that they don't actually support. Albert Schweitzer defeated the idea of a non-historical Jesus completely. But of course, truth and Dan Barker aren't exactly best of soulmates now, are we? Now, let's go to Josephus. Now, Origin does talk about him in his response to Celsius. He talks about him in book 1, part 4, and in book 2, part 13. So again, so this shows the level of research that Dan Barker does. He does talk about them. That Josephus did think he wasn't inside. Now we understand that that part that you're talking about is an interpolation. People added to it to make it more Christian friendly, because Josephus's reaction to the Messiah, the idea of a Jewish Messiah, was always negative. If you look, for example, his views on all the other messianic figures around that time, the war was negative, and probably Christians didn't want the same negativity applied to Christ, which is understandable. But saying it was added wholesale is something that isn't a scholarly opinion, and it isn't the scholarly consensus. You say it's the scholarly consensus. Okay? I am telling you now, prove that it is the scholarly consensus, because the scholarly consensus is what I'm saying. The scholarly consensus is that passage is, as it did exist, but it didn't exist in its current form. That is the scholarly consensus. If you could provide me something that the consensus isn't that, I'd love to read it. Dan Barker doesn't count. Okay, let's talk about Tacitus and his 8 annals of history. See, I can pronounce words properly. So the argument against Tacitus is that he didn't talk about Jesus. Well, he does talk about Jesus. He talks about a person who was crucified by Pilate in the 1st century. And Dan Barker just doesn't want to deal with that, you see, because that would be honest. So he has to say, well, he wasn't around at the time, so he was still an historian. And you have to explain why his historical account wasn't true. He talks about the emperor. That the emperor was was it Tiberius? Tiberius, I think. He talks about the emperor who was the pro that Pilate was consul at the time and stuff like that. Things that sort of led to the credibility, and that he was crucified. See, this is the things that Dan Barker doesn't want you to know. Because if he was actually truthful, he'd have to admit all this stuff. You see, and he can't dismiss Tacitus's opinion. It's not Tacitus, it's Tacitus. um, has been legitimate because, frankly, it isn't. Now, let's talk about Suetonius and Pliny the Younger, not Pliny the Younger, Pliny the Younger. Now, Pliny the Younger was talking about people at his time, and I would agree with you that he was talking about people following Jesus, but not Jesus himself. With Suetonius, he was talking about the term Christus does mean what you mean, but Romans usually sometimes misspelled the term, the Jewish term Christus, which meant the Holy One or Chosen One or something like that. That's what it meant. Actually, there's accounts of people like Origen and Justin Martyr talking about people using the term in that way, saying, "Well, you use it this way." I don't know. Anyway, he was mentioned in a couple of other places, like Clement of Alexandria and things like that. So again, you can't say it isn't a historical fact because again, the scholarly consensus is against you. Now, if you take away Dan Barker, who isn't a historian, he's an ex-evangelical preacher who has no knowledge of how history works whatsoever. He's not an intelligent man in the field. He has no academic understanding, as does not G.A. Wells, who's a German professor. Who are the legitimate sources you have? Nothing. You say the consensus, you don't even know. Again, prevent me with the consensus. Who says it's the consensus? Again, I've actually read the sources, and the consensus is actually the opposite. And I can present you with that evidence if you want it. Actually, I'd recommend somebody vote to you called Tim O'Neill, who's an atheist, who did this whole thing against David Fitzgerald's book called Nailed, in which he talks about this whole Josephus stuff. And he talks about what I just did. He's a lot more meaner than I am, but that's because he's a different person from me. So why don't you, Dee, pick up a book that isn't Dan Barker and actually read a course? Because I'm sorry, your assertion that there is no historical evidence doesn't run up to snuff. And any idiot who says, well, there is no historical evidence is an idiot. For the same reason that people who say that there's no fossil record or there's no carbon data that proves evolution are wrong. You know, both are wrong. They're just wrong on different sides of the argument. And I find it funny, Dave, that you talk about how unknowledgeable I am and how delusional I am. When you don't even to read different sources. You see, you don't read one book and say that proves my point. You read several books coming from different points of view. And then do you read what the scholarly consensus is, and then come forward an opinion from that. You just don't read one book and say, well, that proves my case here. You know, you read people like Bart Ehrman, you read people like Richard Carrier, you read people like Earl Doherty, you read people like Terry Rash, you read people like N.T. Wright, you read people like Crossan, you read people like that. Because that isn't what you do now, is it? And by the way, anals. See you later.